A cold wind blows through the dark mountains of Transylvania. A man with red eyes and long white teeth waits in his coffin. This is not just a story about fear, it's a story about courage, love, and the fight against evil. This is The Hunt for Dracula. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Count. My story began about 7 years ago, in the year 1875. My name is Jonathan Harker, and I live in London, where I work as a man who buys and sells houses for other people. One day I received a letter from a very rich man who lived far away in Transylvania. He wanted to buy a house in England and asked for my help. His name was Count Dracula, and I agreed to find a house for him. After I found a suitable place, the Count asked me to bring all the papers to him in Transylvania. I was not happy about this because I planned to marry my dear Mina in the autumn, and I did not want to leave her. "You must go, Jonathan," Mina said gently. "The Count is rich. If you help him well, he might give you more work later." So I agreed to travel there, not knowing the terrible danger waiting for me. On May 4th, I arrived at a small town called Bistritz. Transylvania was a strange but beautiful country, full of mountains, forests, and rivers. Somewhere high among the mountains stood Castle Dracula. I had 6 hours to wait before the coach left for the castle, so I went into a small hotel. Inside, it was warm and friendly. The people were laughing and talking until one of them asked, "Where are you going, sir?" "To Castle Dracula," I replied. At once, everyone stopped talking and looked at me in silence. I could see fear in their eyes. "Don't go there," one person said quietly. "But I must," I answered. "It's my work." They began whispering again, but no one smiled anymore. Then the hotel keeper's wife came up to me. She took a gold cross from around her neck and put it into my hand. "Take this," she said softly. "There is great danger at Castle Dracula. This may help you." When the coach came, I climbed in. A small crowd stood outside, watching me. As I left, I heard someone whisper the word vampire. The coach climbed higher and higher into the mountains. The sun was bright, but I could see snow on the peaks. Then, suddenly, the sun went down behind the hills, and darkness covered everything. From the forest I heard the howling of wolves, a terrible sound. After some time, the coach stopped. A small black carriage came down a narrow road. 4 black horses pulled it, and the driver was dressed in black, with his hat low over his face. "Where is the Englishman?" he called. "I've come from Castle Dracula." He looked strange in the moonlight, and I felt afraid. But it was too late to turn back. Soon we were racing up through the mountains. The moon hid behind dark clouds, and I could see nothing. Only the sound of the wolves followed us. The driver laughed loudly as the horses ran faster and faster. Then the carriage stopped suddenly. I opened the door and stepped out. Before I could say a word, the carriage turned and disappeared into the night. I was standing alone in front of a great dark castle. Slowly, the heavy wooden door opened. A tall man with white hair stood there. He wore black clothes from head to foot. "Welcome, Mr. Harker," he said. "I am Count Dracula." He held out his hand, and when I touched it, it was as cold as ice. I followed him inside. The Count carefully locked the door behind me and put the key in his pocket. We went upstairs to a large room where a fire burned brightly. On the table there was food and drink. The Count asked me to eat, but he did not eat himself. Later we sat by the fire and talked. His English was excellent. While we spoke, I studied him closely. His face was very pale. His ears were pointed like a cat's, and his teeth were sharp like an animal's. His hands were covered with hair, and his fingers were long and thin. When he touched me, I felt a deep, cold fear. It was almost morning when I went to bed. Outside, I could still hear the wolves howling in the dark. When I woke up, my breakfast was already waiting on a small table near the fire. In the daylight, I saw for the first time how old and dirty the castle really was. All that day I saw no servants anywhere. The Count did not come to breakfast, but there was a note from him on the table. "Go anywhere you like in the castle," it said, "but some rooms are locked. Do not try to enter them." When the Count returned in the evening, he wanted to hear everything about his new house in England. "Well," I began, "it's a big, old, dark house. There's a high wall all around it, and many trees which make the house even darker. It also has a small church nearby." I showed him pictures of the place. He looked pleased. "Ah," he said quietly, "so I shall be near the dead." We talked for a long time, and I began to feel sleepy. When I suddenly woke, the Count's face was very close to mine. The smell from him was horrible. The smell of death. "You are tired," said the Count softly. "Go to bed now." When he smiled, his face looked like a wolf's. Our business was finished. The Count now had all the papers for his new house, and there was no reason for me to stay. But he did not want me to leave. I was alone in the castle with him. I never saw him in the daytime, only at night. Then he would come and talk with me until morning. He asked many questions about England, about its people, and about sending things by ship. "I plan to go there myself soon," he told me. While we talked about ships and the sea, I thought of Mina and her friend Lucy, who were staying by the seaside. Mina was planning to visit them soon. Foolishly, I told the Count about them. There was no mirror in my room, but I had one with me, a gift from Mina. One morning, I was shaving, when suddenly a hand touched my shoulder and a voice said, "Good morning." I looked up. The Count was standing beside me. But in the mirror, he had no reflection. My hand shook in fear, and I cut myself. Blood ran down my face, and I saw the Count's eyes watching it hungrily. He reached out quickly. But when his hand touched the gold cross on my neck, his face changed. Without a word, he grabbed the mirror, walked to the window, and threw it out. I heard it break into 1,000 pieces below. Then he turned and left the room. I stood there, trembling, asking myself, why couldn't I see this man in the mirror? I went to the window and looked down. I was high above the ground. Most of the castle doors were locked. Suddenly I understood the terrible truth. I was a prisoner in Castle Dracula. Chapter 2. I am in danger. One evening the Count said to me, "You must write to your London office and tell Mr. Hawkins that you will stay here for another month." When I heard those words, a cold fear ran through me. Another month. But what could I do? I worked for Mr. Hawkins, and the Count's business was important to him. So if the Count wanted me to stay, I had no choice. I wrote the letter, but I knew he would read it. I couldn't tell Mr. Hawkins the truth, that I was a prisoner in Castle Dracula. That night, the Count did not stay to talk with me. Before leaving, he said, "My young friend, sleep only in this room or in your bedroom. Never fall asleep anywhere else in the castle. You will be in danger if you do." After he left, I went to my room, but I could not rest. I began to walk around the castle. Many doors were locked, but finally I found one that opened. Inside was a room with a large window. The moonlight filled the place, and the mountains looked beautiful and peaceful. Then something moved below the window. It was the Count. Slowly he climbed out of a window below. First his hands, strong and thin like those of an animal, then his head. He began to crawl down the wall, head first. With his black cloak around him, he looked like a great black bird. My blood turned cold. "What kind of man is Count Dracula?" I whispered. I shivered and sat down. The room was warm and comfortable. It looked as if it had once been used by the ladies of the castle long ago. I decided not to return to my cold bedroom, but to sleep there instead. I lay down and closed my eyes. Suddenly, I felt that I was not alone. In the moonlight, I saw 3 beautiful women standing near me, whispering softly. "He is young and strong," one said. "Yes," said another. "There are kisses for all of us." I felt afraid, but strangely drawn to them. I wanted those soft red lips to touch me. One woman came closer and bent over me. Her white teeth touched my neck. Kiss me, I thought. Then a cry of anger filled the room. It was the Count. He pulled the woman away from me. Her blue eyes turned red with wild fury. The Count's face was terrible, his eyes burning with the fire of hell. "Get away from him!" he shouted. "He is mine! You must not touch him!" In an instant, the women were gone, not through the door but vanished like smoke. I remembered nothing more of that night. When I woke, I was lying in my own bed. The gold cross was shining on the table beside me in the morning light. Then I knew the truth. Those women were vampires, and they wanted my blood. 2 nights later, the Count came again. "Write to Mina," he said. "Tell her that your work in Transylvania is finished and that you are coming home." I was overjoyed, but then he added, "Say that you are at Bistritz and date the letter June 29th. A cold fear filled me once again. I understood now. The Count planned to kill me on that day. What could I do? Nothing. He took away my clothes, my papers, and locked my door. Weeks passed. I heard strange noises in the castle, the sound of men working. Perhaps one of them will carry a letter for me, I thought, but it was too late. It was June 29th, and that evening I saw the Count leave the castle from my window. He was carrying my letter to Mina. I knew then that I had to escape soon, or die. Vampires cannot walk in daylight, so the next morning I decided to enter the Count's room while it was safe. His room was just below mine. Using the holes between the stones and the heavy curtain as a rope, I slowly climbed down the wall. It was dangerous. Twice I almost fell. But at last I reached the window and entered the Count's room. The room was empty. The Count was gone. I looked everywhere for the castle keys, but I could not find them. In one corner of the room I saw some gold, and on the other side there was a large wooden door, half open. Behind it I could see stairs leading down. Carefully I went down the steps. At the bottom there was another open door. I stepped through and found myself in a cold stone room. Slowly I looked around. There were about 50 wooden boxes, like long coffins, each one filled with earth, and in one of them lay Count Dracula. He did not move. I could not tell if he was dead or asleep. His eyes were open, cold and still like stone, but his face was not dead. His lips were dark red, as if full of life. I stepped closer, thinking he might have the keys on him. But when I saw those terrible, lifeless eyes, my blood ran cold. Terrified, I turned and ran back the way I had come. I did not stop until I was safely in my room again. That night the Count came to me once more. "Tomorrow you will return to England," he said quietly. And I knew then tomorrow would be the day of my death. I lay on my bed, but I could not sleep. Outside my door I heard the voices of the women, soft and cruel, and then the Count's voice. "Wait, your time has not yet come. Tomorrow night he will be yours." The women laughed, a low, sweet, terrible sound, and I shook with fear. When morning came, I was still alive. I must escape, I thought. But first I need the keys. Once again I climbed down the wall and into the Count's room. Then I hurried down the stairs to the room of coffins. The Count was lying there again, but he looked different. His hair was dark, his skin young, and there was fresh blood on his mouth and neck. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to touch him, searching for the keys. They weren't there. Suddenly I felt a terrible anger. I wanted to kill Count Dracula. I picked up a workman's hammer and raised it high. But before I could strike, the Count's head moved. His burning eyes opened, and his bloody mouth twisted into a horrible smile. I dropped the hammer and stood there, shaking with fear. Just then I heard voices coming from below. The workmen were returning. Quickly I ran back up to the Count's room. From below, I heard the sound of a key turning and hammers striking wood. They were sealing the coffins, getting them ready for a journey, perhaps to England. The Count's words came back to me. I plan to visit your country soon. I tried to run back down, but it was too late. A cold wind blew through the passage, and the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. I was trapped again. From the window, I watched the heavy carts below, full of coffins. The men drove them away, leaving me alone in the castle, alone with those terrible vampire women. Now, as I write these words in my diary, I know what I must do. I will try to escape down the outer wall. The window is high above the ground, but I have no choice. I will take some of the gold with me. It may help me later. If I die, it will be better than the death waiting for me here. Goodbye, Mina. Will I ever see you again? Chapter 3. Lucy in Danger. While Jonathan was away, I felt very unhappy. He did not write to me often, and when he did, his letters were short and strange. I knew something was wrong, but what? Was Jonathan in danger? I thought about him all the time. Why didn't he come back to England and to me? When a letter finally came, I felt a little better. Jonathan wrote that he was coming home and was now in Bistritz. But again, his letter was short and odd. Perhaps he's ill, I thought sadly. Around that time, my dear friend Lucy also wrote to me. I know you will be happy for me, she said. Arthur has asked me to marry him. Isn't it wonderful? I love him very much. He's away just now, and you know that Mother and I are staying in Whitby by the sea. Please come and stay with us. I want to tell you everything. Arthur Holmwood truly loved Lucy, and I was very glad for her. I decided to go at once. It would also help me stop worrying about Jonathan for a while. Lucy met me at the station. It was wonderful to see her again. She looked so full of life, her eyes shining with happiness. Oh, Mina, she said, I'm so happy. I love Arthur more than anything. I was happy for her, but sometimes it was hard. When Lucy spoke of Arthur, I thought of Jonathan, and my heart grew heavy. The weather was fine, and Lucy and I spent our days walking by the sea or climbing to the old church on the hill. At night, we slept in the same room, but Lucy often walked in her sleep. She began to sleep badly, so her mother and I decided to lock the bedroom door at night to keep her safe. Then one day the weather changed. The sky turned dark and heavy, and that night a terrible storm came. Lucy was strangely excited. She sat by the window and watched the sea all night long. The next morning, people said a ship had crashed onto the beach. It's a Russian ship from Varna on the Black Sea, Lucy's servant told us. There are coffins filled with earth on it, and a big black dog jumped off the ship and ran up the hill. Is everyone on the ship alive? Lucy asked. That's the strange thing, the servant said. There was no one on the ship, neither dead nor alive. Everyone in the town was talking about the mystery, but no one could explain it, and no one ever saw the black dog again. That night, I woke suddenly. The bedroom door was open, and Lucy was gone. I searched the whole house but could not find her. I'm afraid for her, I said to her mother. I don't know why. Then I remembered that Lucy often liked to sit quietly in the churchyard. I ran out into the night to look for her. There she was, sitting in the moonlight, her face white and still. Behind her, I thought I saw something dark and terrible moving closer. Slowly, its head bent down toward Lucy's neck. "Lucy, Lucy!" I cried. A white face with burning red eyes turned to look at me. And then it was gone. Lucy lay alone in the moonlight, fast asleep. I woke her, and she gave a small cry. She touched her neck, and I saw 2 tiny drops of blood there. After that night, Lucy grew weaker. She left her bed every night, and her lovely face became white as snow. I was terribly afraid for her, so I locked the door each night. Still, I had no news from Jonathan. I was tired and worried, and I couldn't sleep well myself. One night, I decided to go for a walk alone. Lucy will be all right, I told myself. The door is locked. She can't get out, and no one can get in. But when I came back, I found Lucy by the open window. "Lucy!" I cried, but she did not answer. She was asleep, and outside the window I saw something black, like a large bird. A few days later, I received a letter. Jonathan was ill and in a hospital in Budapest. Of course I must go to him immediately, I said to Lucy. I didn't want to leave her, but Jonathan was everything to me. He needs me, I whispered. When I finally reached Budapest and held Jonathan in my arms, I felt such happiness and relief. He was very ill, weak and pale, but the doctors said he was getting better every day. Jonathan didn't want to talk about what had happened to him in Castle Dracula, but one evening he gave me his diary. "Read this, Mina," he said quietly. When I read his diary, I finally learned the terrible truth about Count Dracula and the awful things Jonathan had faced in that dark, lonely castle. But he had escaped. When he fell ill in the mountains, some workmen found him and took him to the hospital. Poor Jonathan. His face was thin and white, and his eyes still full of fear. But we were together again, and I believed that everything would soon be all right. Jonathan and I were married on September 1st, in the hospital chapel. Then, when he was strong enough, we began our journey home. We reached England on September 18th, and it was wonderful to see our country again. The streets of London were full of light and warmth that evening, and people looked happy everywhere. Jonathan smiled softly. "Oh, Mina, I love you," he said. "I love you too, Jonathan," I answered. My heart was full of joy, but suddenly Jonathan's face went white with fear. He was staring out of the carriage window. Across the street, outside a shop, stood a beautiful girl with dark hair. She was sitting in a carriage, waiting for someone, and near her, watching her closely, was a tall, thin man with long white teeth and a red mouth. Jonathan gave a cry. "It's the Count! Count Dracula, here in London!" Then he covered his face with his hands and said nothing more for the rest of the journey. I held his arm tightly. Was it really true? Could that terrible Count be here in London with us? When we arrived home, there was a letter waiting from Arthur Holmwood. The words broke my heart. Lucy was dead. My dearest, kind Lucy, dead! It couldn't be true. Later, Jonathan and I read the letter again, slowly. "Soon after you left," Arthur wrote, "Lucy became worse. I didn't know what to do. I called our old friend, Dr. Jack Seward, to come and see her. I hoped he could help her. He came at once, but in the end nobody could save poor Lucy. She died yesterday." I sat in silence, holding the letter. My hands were shaking. "Lucy," My sweet, laughing Lucy was gone forever. Chapter 4. Lucy's Death. When I read Arthur's letter and learned the terrible news about Lucy's strange illness, I went to her at once. When I saw her, my heart filled with fear. She was lying in bed, white as a ghost, and so thin that she hardly looked like herself. She hardly moved and spoke very little. At night, Lucy was afraid to sleep, and every morning there were 2 small wounds on her neck, tiny red marks, as if from some sharp teeth. I did not understand what was happening to her. She was losing blood. But how? Could it be through those little marks? I decided to send for my old teacher, Professor Van Helsing, from Holland. Perhaps he could help where others could not. He came at once. When he saw Lucy, he said firmly, "We must give her blood immediately." "She can have mine," cried Arthur. "Every drop if she needs it." Van Helsing agreed, and soon after the blood transfusion, Lucy began to look better. Her face had more color, and she smiled weakly. Before he left that day, Van Helsing brought a bunch of flowers with a strong smell. He placed them in a circle around Lucy's neck. "These are garlic flowers," he said. "Do not take them off tonight, and do not open your window." Then he returned to Holland for a few days. Before leaving, he warned us, "Watch Lucy every night, and make sure she wears the garlic flowers." Lucy's mother was ill herself. Her heart was weak, and Arthur had to go home because his father was dying. So for a week I watched Lucy at night. Sometimes, as I sat beside her bed, I heard strange noises at the window. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a tree branch. During the day I worked long hours at the hospital, and after a week I was very tired. One night I decided not to go to Lucy's house. I thought she would be safe. Her mother and the servants were there, and Van Helsing sent fresh garlic flowers every day. The next morning, at the hospital, I received a note from Van Helsing. "Watch Lucy carefully tonight. I shall arrive tomorrow." But tomorrow was today. The note had arrived too late. I did not wait for breakfast. I ran straight to Lucy's house. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. Just then Van Helsing arrived. "What happened?" he cried. "Did you not get my note? Hurry, we may already be too late." We knocked again, still no answer. We ran to the back of the house, and Van Helsing broke a kitchen window. Together we climbed inside. It was dark. On the kitchen floor, we found the servants lying still. "They're not dead," said Van Helsing, feeling one woman's wrist. "They're only asleep. Someone must have put something in their drinks. Come, we must find Lucy, if we are not too late." We ran upstairs and stopped outside Lucy's room. Our faces were white, our hands shaking. Gently we opened the door. The sight inside froze my heart. 2 women lay on the bed, Lucy and her mother. Both were white as snow. On Mrs. Westenra's face was a look of terrible fear. In her hand she still clutched the garlic flowers that had once protected Lucy. Pieces of broken glass lay on the floor beneath the open window. Van Helsing looked down sadly. "The poor mother is dead," he said softly. "But for Lucy there may still be hope. Go and wake the servants." I ran downstairs to wake them. When I came back, Van Helsing was giving orders. "Put her in a hot bath," he said. "Quickly, we may yet save her." After some time, Lucy began to move a little. We carried her to a warm bed. Sometimes she slept, but she was too weak to fight for life. She could not eat anything, and her breathing grew slower each hour. We sent for Arthur, and when he arrived he was heartbroken. His father had just died, and now he saw that Lucy was close to death too. Someone stayed with Lucy at all times. That night, Arthur and Van Helsing slept in the sitting room, while I watched beside Lucy's bed. At 6 o'clock, Van Helsing came upstairs. Arthur was still asleep. The professor went to Lucy's bedside and looked closely at her neck. "The wounds are gone," he said quietly. "She will die very soon. Bring Arthur." Arthur followed me upstairs. When he saw Lucy, her eyes opened, soft and bright. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered. "Kiss me, my love." Arthur bent toward her, but suddenly Van Helsing stopped him. "No!" he shouted. For a moment, Lucy's face changed. It became cold and angry. She opened her mouth, and I saw that her teeth were long and sharp. Then her eyes closed again, and she fell back asleep. When she opened her eyes once more, she smiled weakly, took Van Helsing's hand, and whispered, "My true friend." Then, very quietly, Lucy died. "She's gone," Van Helsing said. Arthur buried his face in his hands and cried bitterly. Later, I went back into Lucy's room with Van Helsing. We stood beside her bed and looked at her peaceful, lovely face. "Poor girl," I said. "It's the end." Van Helsing shook his head. "No, my friend. This is only the beginning." A few days later, strange stories began appearing in the newspapers. They told of young children who went out at night and were not seen again until morning. When they returned, they spoke of a beautiful lady who called to them in the dark. Each child had 2 small wounds on the neck and tiny drops of blood. Van Helsing came to see me, carrying one of the newspapers. "What do you think of this?" he asked. I read the stories carefully. "I don't know," I said. "These marks sound like the wounds poor Lucy had, but how can that be?" Then Van Helsing explained his terrible idea. At first I could not believe what I was hearing. We argued for a long time. Finally I said, "Do you mean that Lucy was killed by a vampire, and now that same vampire is taking blood from these children?" Van Helsing looked at me seriously. "No, you don't understand. The vampire taking their blood is Lucy herself." I was shocked and angry. "That's not true!" I cried. "Then come with me," he said. "I will show you." That night we went to Lucy's tomb. Van Helsing had the key, and he opened the heavy door. The air was cold and still. The dead flowers lay on Lucy's coffin. The place was dark and terrible. Slowly, Van Helsing lifted the lid of the coffin. "Look," he said. I stepped closer and looked inside. The coffin was empty. My heart stopped. It was a terrible shock, but Van Helsing only nodded. "Now we must wait outside," he said. We waited all night in the dark. I was cold, frightened, and angry, at him, at myself, at everything. Then, near dawn, something white moved among the trees by the tomb. We ran toward it and found a small child lying on the ground. Van Helsing picked the child up and showed me its neck. "There are no wounds," I said. "No," he answered softly. "We are just in time." The next day Van Helsing and I returned to the tomb and opened Lucy's coffin once more. This time, her body was lying there. She had been dead for more than a week, yet she did not look dead. Her face was pale but beautiful, and her lips were dark red, almost alive. Van Helsing pulled back her lips and showed me her long, sharp teeth. "Now do you believe me?" he asked. "Lucy is one of the undead. With these teeth, she will soon kill another of those poor children. We must stop her before she does." He paused for a moment. "But first we must send for Arthur. He must see and believe it for himself." When Arthur came, he was full of grief and anger. He could not believe that Lucy, his sweet, beautiful Lucy, was now one of the undead. But in the end, he agreed to come with us to the tomb. It was almost midnight when we reached the churchyard. The night was dark, but now and then a little moonlight broke through the clouds. Van Helsing unlocked the door, and we went inside. "Now, Jack," he said to me, "you were here with me yesterday. Was Lucy's body in this coffin, then?" "It was," I answered. Slowly, Van Helsing lifted the lid. Arthur stepped forward, his face as white as paper. We all looked down. The coffin was empty. For a moment no one spoke. Then Van Helsing whispered, "Now we must go outside and wait." It was a relief to step out into the cold night air after the darkness of the tomb. We stood quietly among the trees. Then, through the shadows, we saw something white moving toward us. The figure came closer. It was a woman with a white face and a red mouth, and drops of fresh blood fell from her lips. Suddenly, it stopped and stared at us with a look of wild anger. Arthur gave a small cry. "It's Lucy!" Lucy smiled softly and said, "Oh, Arthur, come to me. Leave the others and come to me, my love." Arthur lowered his hands from his face and began to move toward her. But Van Helsing stepped between them and raised his gold cross. Lucy stopped at once and stepped back, her face twisted in rage. Then she turned and walked toward the tomb. The heavy stone door was closed, but she passed straight through it. Van Helsing turned to Arthur. "Now, my friend, do you understand?" Arthur covered his face with his hands. "I do. Oh, I do!" The next day the three of us, Arthur, Van Helsing, and I, went back to the tomb. Van Helsing carried a bag. Inside it were tools for what we had to do. When we entered the tomb, he opened the coffin again. Lucy's body lay there, still horribly beautiful. Arthur trembled. "Is this really Lucy?" he whispered. "It is, and it isn't," said Van Helsing. "But wait, and soon you will see the real Lucy again." From the bag, he took out a long wooden stake and a hammer. Arthur and I stood silently, watching. "Arthur," Van Helsing said, "you loved Lucy. Only you can bring her back to peace. You must drive this wood through her heart. It will be hard for you, but it will soon be done. Can you do this for her?" Arthur's face was pale, but he said quietly, "I can." He held the wooden stake over Lucy's heart, raised the hammer, and struck hard. The body twisted from side to side, and a terrible scream came from the open red mouth. Arthur did not stop. Again and again he hit the wood until, at last, Lucy's body lay still and quiet. The hammer fell from Arthur's hand. He stood there shaking. Van Helsing placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Now you may kiss her. The vampire is dead, and your true Lucy has come back." We looked down at her face. It was pale and calm, peaceful at last. Arthur bent and kissed her softly on the lips. Then Van Helsing closed the coffin, this time forever. "Now, my friends," said Van Helsing, "our work is not finished. We have only begun. We must find the vampire that made Lucy what she was. It will be hard and dangerous. Will you help me?" Arthur and I looked at each other and said together, "Yes, we will." Chapter 5. Mina in Danger. A few days after Mina received Arthur's letter with the news of Lucy's death, another letter arrived. This one was from Professor Van Helsing, Arthur's old friend. "I know from your letters to Lucy that you were her closest friend," he wrote. "I would very much like to meet you and talk about the time you spent with her in Whitby." So the professor came to visit us at our house. There, we learned the whole story of poor Lucy's terrible death. Mina gave Van Helsing Jonathan's diary to read. When he finished it, his face was full of excitement. "Ah, now I understand everything!" he cried. "Count Dracula. He was the vampire who killed poor Miss Lucy. Will you help us to find him?" Of course, Mina and I agreed. When I had seen Count Dracula in London, I had been full of fear, but now I felt stronger, because at last we had a purpose. We began our work immediately. Mina went to stay with Dr. Jack Seward to tell him and Arthur about the Count, while I went to Whitby. I wanted to learn about the ship that came during the storm, the one that had brought Count Dracula to England. After asking many questions, I discovered that the coffins from the ship were now in the Count's house in London. I hurried back and told Van Helsing the news. He called everyone together, Jack, Arthur, and me, and said seriously, "Now the danger begins. I have read many old books about vampires, and I know this. They can only come out at night. During the day they are like dead bodies, and must rest in a hiding place. Count Dracula hides in his coffins during the day. If we can find him in one, we can kill him. But first we must make his coffins useless. We'll put holy bread in each one. Then he cannot return to them, and he will have no place to hide. Without rest he will grow weak, and then we can destroy him." That night, the four of us, Van Helsing, Jack, Arthur, and I, went to Dracula's house. Mina, of course, stayed behind. I was afraid to leave her, but she smiled bravely. "There is more danger for you than for me," she said softly. Jack had brought a bunch of old keys, and with one of them we opened the door. The house was dark, cold, and dirty, and everywhere we could smell blood. We moved quietly through the empty rooms until we found the place where the coffins were stored. Van Helsing opened his bag and took out small pieces of holy bread. "We must put one piece in each coffin," he said. We worked quickly but carefully. It took a long time to open each heavy coffin and place the bread inside. Just as we were opening the last one, Van Helsing suddenly cried out, "We are too late! The Count is coming!" We looked up and saw Count Dracula moving through the darkness like a black cloud. His pale face glowed with anger, and his eyes burned red like fire. Van Helsing raised his gold cross, and the Count stopped suddenly. Then, like smoke, he began to move back into the shadows. "Run!" shouted Van Helsing. "We must get away, and quickly. He has seen us, and now Mina may be in great danger." At those words my heart almost stopped. "Oh, Mina!" I cried in my heart. "I cannot lose you." When we reached Jack's house, everything was silent. I ran upstairs to our room. The door was locked. "Help me! Oh, help me!" I shouted. Together we broke down the door, and then I felt the blood freeze in my veins. A tall, dark figure stood in the moonlight by the window. In his arms was Mina. Her white nightdress was stained with blood, and her face rested against Count Dracula's chest. Blood dripped from his mouth, and he was holding her tightly, while she drank his blood. I rushed forward to pull him away from her. At the same time, Van Helsing ran toward the Count and lifted his gold cross. At the sight of it, Count Dracula gave a terrible hiss and dropped Mina's body. She screamed and fell onto the bed. A dark cloud passed across the moon, and when the light came back, the Count was gone. "Mina, my love!" I cried, taking her into my arms. "What has happened? Tell us!" Mina trembled. "Don't leave me! Please, don't leave me!" she cried. Her face was pale, and on her neck we saw 2 small wounds. She put her head in her hands and gave a long, terrible scream. "Stay with me!" she cried, and I held her tightly in my arms until the first light of morning shone in the sky. Chapter 6. Dracula Must Die. The next morning, Van Helsing, Dr. Seward, Arthur, Mina, and I sat together to make our plans. Mina was very pale, but she was brave and wanted to help. We all knew that we had to find and kill Count Dracula before Mina died, or worse. "If we fail," said Van Helsing seriously, "Mina will die and become a vampire forever. I went to the Count's house this morning. The last coffin is gone. We must find it. Dracula will be sleeping inside during the day. If we find him before dark, we can destroy him." "But where is it now?" I cried. No one knew. Then Mina spoke softly. "I feel that I am half a vampire already. Sometimes strange thoughts come into my head. I think they are the Count's thoughts. Just now I heard the sound of a ship moving through water." "Of course!" shouted Van Helsing. "Dracula is leaving England. He knows we are his enemies. It's too dangerous for him here. He must be going back to Transylvania by ship. We must find which ship left last night for the Black Sea." At the London shipping office, we asked about ships that had sailed for the Black Sea. One had left for Varna the night before. A sailor told us about a tall, thin man dressed in black who had come at the last minute. He had a pale face, burning eyes, and a very red mouth. The sailor said, "And he brought with him a long wooden box." Van Helsing nodded. "That was Dracula. The ship will take about 3 weeks to reach Varna, but we can take the train across Europe and arrive much sooner. We leave tomorrow." We left London on a cold October day, and 4 days later we reached Varna. There we waited for the ship to arrive. Every day, Mina told us she could still hear the sound of water, as if the Count were calling to her. 3 long weeks passed, but the ship never came. Then we finally heard the news. It had gone to Galatz instead. We took the first train to Galatz, but again we were too late. "The box is gone," one of the sailors said. "A man came early this morning and took it away." We hurried back to tell Mina, but when we entered the hotel, we saw that she already knew. Her face was white and full of fear. "He has gone," she whispered, "and he is taking me with him. Oh, my dear friends, before I change into a vampire, you must kill me. Do for me what you did for poor Lucy. Promise me that you will." I took her hands, but I couldn't speak. The thought of killing her, my sweet Mina, filled me with horror. Later that night, while she slept, we made new plans. "She is right," said Van Helsing sadly. "Our poor Mina is in great danger. She is already beginning to change. Her teeth are longer and sharper, and sometimes, when the Count is in her mind, her eyes grow cold and hard. We must find him and kill him before it's too late." I remember little of the next few days. Fear and anger burned inside me. We discovered that the Count's coffin was traveling by boat up the river, so Arthur, Jack, and I followed it in another boat. Meanwhile, Van Helsing and Mina traveled by carriage across the mountains toward Castle Dracula. When I said goodbye to her, my heart broke. I thought I might never see her again. For 5 days we followed the Count's boat, but we could not catch it. Then, some villagers told us that the coffin was now traveling by road. We bought horses and rode hard through the cold night. By the next afternoon, we were near Castle Dracula. "We must ride faster," I shouted. The sun was beginning to sink behind the hills. Then, suddenly, we saw a cart on the road ahead, pulled by horses. On the back of the cart was a large wooden coffin. I had only one thought: to kill the vampire forever. Arthur and Jack were right behind me as I jumped from my horse onto the cart. They fought the driver and his men while I pushed the coffin to the ground. It fell open, and Count Dracula lay inside. The last light of the setting sun shone across his terrible face. His red eyes burned with hate. In a few seconds, when the sun disappeared, he would be free to move again. I jumped down, raised my knife, and drove it deep into his heart. The blade went straight through, and Dracula gave a horrible scream, then fell still. At that same moment, the sun went down, and when we looked again into the coffin, it was empty. High above us, on the hill, stood Castle Dracula. Then we saw Van Helsing coming down toward us, and with him was Mina. I ran to her and took her in my arms. Her lovely face was bright again, full of peace and light. "It's all right, my love," she said softly. "We found the tombs of the 3 vampire women. They can never hurt us again. And Dracula is dead at last. We can begin to live again. Thank you for watching this story of bravery and hope." If you enjoyed the hunt for Dracula, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories rewritten in easy English. Leave a comment and tell us, what would you do if you met Count Dracula?